We are honored to have in our midst our keynote speaker, Dr. Robertico Croes from the University of Central Florida. Dr. Robertico Croes is the Associate Director of the Dick Pope Senior Institute for Tourism Studies at the Rosen College of Hospitality Management at the University of Central Florida. Mr. Croes' presentation is entitled Exploring Smart/Intelligent Tourism Pathways, the case for St. Maarten. Thereafter, we will have the opportunity to dance the night away with the music provided by our own control band. So it is my great pleasure to introduce to you Dr. Robertico Croes, who is an applied economist and international political scientist with a research interest in tourism development and management in developing countries. Dr. Croes is the author of 2 books and over 100 journal articles, book chapters, and presentations throughout the world. Dr. Croes has lectured and made presentations on these topics throughout the world, including the Netherlands, Spain, Armenia, Venezuela, Nicaragua, Costa Rica, Brazil, Ecuador, Curacao, the Bahamas, Barbados, Puerto Rico, Mexico, and the United States. And after tonight, he will be able to add St. Maarten to that list. He has research such also being presented in the predominant industry and research conferences around the world, including Portugal, South Korea, South Africa, Hong Kong, Ireland, Turkey, Taiwan, Malaysia, and Trinidad and Tobago. So without any further ado, I would like to introduce to you our keynote speaker for this evening, Dr. Robertico Croes.
Now, when I'm going to talk a little bit, about some ways that St. Maarten could think in terms of when you ponder about the future, how you can make some decisions that can help you, make some quantum leap in the industry, which is right now not only the foundation of your prosperity, but as it looks like, it is a very solid foundation for the future. So the title, as Clarette indicated, is about smart tourism. And basically, smart tourism is about using information in an intelligent way and gathering data that is useful and helpful so that you can make smart decisions, but also be very proactive in terms of your policy and in terms of your actions and activities. And the way I'm going to share with you these thoughts is based on 5 main ideas. The first idea is with regard to the search. When I started to revisit St. Maarten since 16 years ago. The second is, what did I discover when I started looking at St. Maarten again. Third is some of the ideas that I want to share with you. The fourth is about the Anna Karenina bias that small islands are confronted with. And finally is kind of atonement, a reconciliation. How can we move forward as a country? And as I mentioned to you, when we think about smart tourism, it's about having information, the right information at the right time, and particularly useful information. I was struck by the fact that when I think about small islands, and I had the opportunity to study 37 islands in the past 8 years. When I looked at these 37 islands scattered all over the world, what I discovered is basically that they have a lot of raw data, a lot of information, but most of the time this information is not readily available. It's not useful. So there is, on many occasions, and coming from a small island myself, I know that we because of pressure or pressing moments, we take decisions without really looking at the information and what the information can teach us. And with tourism, the problem is, or the challenge is, that because tourism is a perishable good, a perishable product, so which means that you cannot put tourism in inventory like any other product. I mean, if you don't sell a hotel room tonight, that hotel room is gone forever. So that's why it is very, very pertinent that you think in terms of how can I be proactive and make sure that I don't lose this particular room or this particular seat, whether in a restaurant or in a plane. So it is very important that we have this timely information, useful information, where we can base our decisions on. And when I look at St. Maarten, one of the first things I discovered is St. Maarten is not any different than those 37 islands that I have studied. Scant information. Information is not readily available. It's very difficult to get. And for example, when I tried to look at the receipts of St. Maarten in the past 15, 20 years, I had really to dig into the balance of payment of the Netherlands Antilles in order to get that information. So, for example, it is lacking at the tourism office. The same thing with arrivals. So, and what struck me is there is one organization called the STR, the Smith Travel Research. Usually, all hotels in the world are associated with this particular company. The reason for that is because you want to benchmark, you want to compare yourself, you want to know about good practices. And there are only 2 hotels in St. Maarten which are associated with STR. So you don't have an idea about ADRs, occupancy rates, and RevPARs. So it is very difficult to make some, judgment calls or assessment with regard to where St. Maarten is at this moment. What is actually the output of St. Maarten in terms of all the investment that St. Maarten has made so far in its main industry. So that is what I found a little bit in my search. But the good news is that when finally I had the opportunity to dig through all the numbers based on the balance of payment of the Netherlands Antilles, I got some very interesting numbers of St. Maarten. First is, in the past decade, tourism arrivals has grown. Of course, it is kind of flat. If you look back at the past 12 years, less than 1%, but it has grown, which is very, very important. When you look at the tourism receipts, what we can see is not only it has grown over time, over the past 12 years, but when you deflate these numbers, which means when you integrate inflation rates, it means as well that the tourism receipts has grown over time, more than 2%. So in a way, you did much better than many other islands in the Caribbean, because many other islands, while they have grown in tourism receipts nominally, because of high inflation, basically high inflation has really removed all the progress that these islands have made. So, which means that basically they're losing money. So St. Maarten has done well in that respect. However, when we dig deeper into these numbers and we look very carefully at what these numbers are really telling us, what I have discovered is that there is a huge challenge with regard to the foundations of this industry here in St. Maarten, which has to do with seasonality. Seasonality shapes or influences in a very excessive way the demand in St. Maarten. And that is a dangerous pattern that you really need to think about, ponder about, in order to see how can you resolve this particular pattern. Because no matter what you do, and you have done great so far, if seasonality continues unabated as is going right now, it can hurt you at some point in the future. And with this particular diagram, you can see that when we look at seasonality and we decompose seasonality in terms of trend, in terms of cycles, we've seen that in the 3 areas where tourism is being defined here in St. Maarten and Croes stayover and receipts, we see at the red bars that seasonality overwhelmingly shapes and determines what demand is all about here in St. Maarten. And the most interesting thing and the challenging thing is that there is a growing gap since the past few years between your high season and your low season. So it's a growing gap. You can see it is in this particular diagram. So it is very, very pertinent and imperative that you try to really close the gap again between your first quarter and your third quarter. Because what does it mean in terms of business? It means for business people that you will have problems of cash flow. So if you're not really having an extraordinary first quarter, you will run into trouble in your third quarter. For the government, it means problems of cash flow as well, because you will have less money in order to pay your dues during the third quarter. So this whole trend is not a good trend. It's something that you have to think about and see how strategically you can really focus on this particular problem. The second important thing that I discovered is the mix of cruise and stay over tourism. The bar on the left-hand side is the Aruba bar, and I compared Aruba because I'm from there, but recently we did a study in Aruba about 2 years ago. And what we found is the mix is, in terms of receipts, is 95% stay over and 5% cruise tourism. In St. Maarten is about 50-50. What does it mean? It means that the most important component of your industry, or the engine of growth of your industry, which is the accommodation, cannot really play its role in terms of the multiplier effect that it can bring about for the economy. For example, structurally, the accommodation sector is relatively weak with 55-62% occupancy, with five months with steep low occupancy. So it will affect the ADRs, it will affect the RevPAR, and consequently, what will happen, and I'm telling you this without knowing all the numbers, but just by focusing on these raw data that I have been able to put my hands on. What it is telling us is that if you do not take care of the accommodation sector at some point, what will happen is that you will create some challenges in the future like you have right now. For example, I've read the Millennium Development Goals, a report that was written in about 2 years ago, where about 1 in 4 households in St. Maarten does not have an income. It's telling us that tourism benefits is not getting to everybody. So, and that could be a real challenge. So tourism is not really connected to the society at large, while tourism is more or about 80% of the total economy. This is what it's telling us, because your accommodation sector is not strong enough. So therefore, this mix is a mix that you have to think about. So it is the same thing in terms of seasonality, but to think about how to close that particular gap, it is also very crucial and imperative to think about this mix, whether you would like to see this mix in the future, because probably this mix will start showing diminishing returns that you will not be able to make a U-turn if you are not really on top in terms of what kind of strategy you would be following in the future. So what is the challenge here? The challenge is that small islands, no matter what you do, you will run into a wall that you don't have, endless land. So you cannot continue to grow in volume because you are, as a small island, you're confined by land. And And the second important thing is that no matter what you do, the industry that you're in, your cost will continue to grow. There is no two ways about it, because tourism is a service or labor-intensive industry. So therefore, the only way out of this conundrum is basically to focus on increasing your prices, which seems very counterintuitive, right? But that's the only thing, because if you cannot increase your prices, it means that at some point, cost will really bite you in the foot. And probably a lot of businesses are already like that, because I can see from the numbers that you have some challenges in the third quarter with cash flow, many of you. And I can see it as well in terms of, because of the accommodation sector is not strong enough, there is no large multiplier affecting many other businesses or revealing missing opportunities here. So those are the two challenges that you have, and so the only crazy idea or counterintuitive idea is you need to increase the price, no matter what you do, in order to survive and be very competitive. It's a little bit different than perhaps what the central bank is telling you in terms of if you increase your price, you're not competitive. Now here's some crazy ideas. A colleague of mine at the University of Florida and Temple University and myself, one day we were discussing how can we come up with some ideas which are a little bit outside of the box. And we said, what about if small islands decide to remove all the airport tax and fees? What will happen? And the reason why this is important is accessibility is very important. I mean, the only way people can come to an island is by plane or by boat, right? So accessibility is very crucial. And accessibility has two very components in terms of its definition. It's not only the distance, the cost of physically bringing you over, but also the search cost in terms of the communication about your product. So we said, okay, if we can eliminate that, what will happen? We looked at 10 islands in the Caribbean. We looked at New Providence, Providenciales, Grand Cayman, St. Vincent, St. Kitts, Aruba, of course, St. Thomas, Dominica, and St. Bart's. We didn't look at St. Maarten because we couldn't find data for that. So we analyzed the tickets from Miami to these islands, New York, these islands, Chicago, and LA. What we found is very interesting. And we look at the seasonality, of course. And I'm giving you this example because I know that the third quarter is a very challenging quarter for St. Maarten. So we found that the third quarter, if you eliminate those fees and taxes, which are between 25 and 40% of your ticket. Right now, when I traveled from Orlando to here, I paid about 32% on top of the price of my ticket on airport fees and taxes. And it's about 48% for St. Maarten, 52% for the US government. Yes? Now, if you eliminate that, it means that you can increase prices in your hotels by close to 9%. And I did a very easy, straightforward calculation. 262 million in the third quarter in 2012. Per month is about 87 million. Assuming that you are a little bit similar to Aruba, 45% of the spending per day of the tourists goes for accommodation, so I took 45% of that. After all that, plus the 9% increase, that would make the hotels or make them able to increase their revenues by $29. That's direct money. I'm not talking even about multiplier, direct money. And that's a huge amount of money that, you know, if you take taxes, I'm not so sure what is the room tax here, but we have estimated for some islands, what it means is that through room taxes, the tourist board, if you earmark those directly to the tourist board for tourism, it means that the tourism board will have enough money to subsidize their airport, plus will remain with some money in order to do other things. So we'll get more money out of that. That's something to think about in terms of trade-off. I don't know the exact numbers here, but it is another way of thinking in terms of how can you, move forward in terms of your receipts. Another thing, the same 10 islands. We looked at 100 hotels. Very easy. We look at TripAdvisor. And we look specifically at 3 things. We look at thumbs up, we look at the chain, and we look at the class of the hotel. It turned out to be that both thumbs up and the class of the hotel, which means, you're a luxury hotel, you're an upper scale hotel, or mid-scale, or whatever, these two, the hotel class, or the thumbs up, have an enormous impact in terms of generating more receipts for hotels. So even if, for example, the first idea, you could say, it doesn't make any sense, just throw it away in the waste basket, that's fine. But hotels on their own can do a lot by improving their quality. And here are some very specific examples. These are very hard numbers for these 100 hotels. If you increase 10% of thumbs up at TripAdvisor, look at the number that you could have as premium, 53%. Or if you can move 1 scale up in terms of class, you can increase 73% as premium. So it behooves the hotels themselves to think about, how can I improve my customer service? So when they go back to TripAdvisor, they can write great things about, not only the offering, but also the service quality that we can provide. So this is another idea that can be done. The third idea. Most of the time, small islands are confronted with bad news about, climate change. Climate change is bad, which is true. I mean, it's a very serious thing. But how about if we think that we can use climate in a more positive way for a small island in order to zoom in, laser beam our marketing effort? This is a study that we did in Aruba. We looked at 3 aspects of weather. We looked at wind, we looked at temperature, and we looked at rainfall. Both pull and push. So we looked at it in the United States and in Venezuela. What we learned is that in the United States, the customers that visit Aruba, they are sensitive about wind and temperature on 4 occasions during the year. In February, in August, in September, and in November. So if you want to talk about weather, all the other months, basically, you're wasting your marketing dollars. That's not where you should put your marketing dollars or talk about. That's not the narrative, the story that you need to tell them. We did the same thing for Venezuela. For Venezuela, only rainfall and wind were important. But these two factors were important only for the first part of the year. So, if, in the case of the United States, for example, you have low winds in high temperature in February, the likelihood that your demand will increase from the States is low. Because the weather in February, the winter would be mild, will be great. So you can expect that, you can be proactive. So you can switch to Venezuela if there's a lot of rainfall, which is the time of their season of rainfall. Yes? So you can move your marketing dollars in order to really zoom in and complement that market just in February by using the weather narrative in order to boost your demand. But if you want to use that part, use Venezuela, for example, in the second part of the year and talking about the weather, again, you're wasting your money. So this is, very important, crucial, significant information, useful information, how you can direct your marketing dollar and zoom in really into those markets to complement each other and to be very dynamic and proactive. Whenever tourists use cash, a lot of cash, what it does is it lowers the speed of the circulation of money in the economy, because people tend to hoard the dollars. As a matter of fact, for example, in the study that we did in Aruba about this, the lag time, meaning that the moment the cab drivers get $1 from a tourist cash, it takes on average about 6 to 7 months before that money goes into the economy, which means that the economy is not growing, it's slowing down. So it is very important for you to know what is the payment mode here, because right now in Aruba, the central bank is thinking about how to incentivize people to use less cash, to go more for plastic money. Because credit cards, if, for example, they use credit cards, it means that the money goes in immediately into the economy. So the quicker and the more money in the economy, the more the economy will grow, the faster it will grow, the more multiplier you will have. So these are some of the ideas I want to share with you in order for you to think, how can we do business in such a way that it becomes smarter, more effective, more efficient. However, as small islands, we have another challenge, which is the challenge of how do we coordinate this? How do we make it happen? So it's easy said than done. And one of the principles that always really struck me when I read this book of Leo Tolstoy is how he started this particular novel of Anna Karenina. The first sentence, happy families are all alike. Every unhappy family is unhappy in its own way. Which basically means, if you know there's a happy family, it means that that family has really taken care in a successful way of all the different responsibilities that you have as a family. You know, how to get an employment, how to get more money for your family, how to divide up that money for your children, about school, about a number of things that you have to take care in your household. And all these things are interconnected. You cannot do one and forget about the other. Well, it is the same thing when you manage a destination. There are so many things you need to do. You have to think about the macro purpose problem. I already mentioned one, for example. Is tourism focused, the macro focus is on jobs? You have about 12% unemployment. Is it that? Is it more income for the household? Is it, for example, making people happier, having a better quality of life? So you have to decide and zoom in on what is exactly the purpose that you think tourism should have. The strategy, how can I pursue that? How can I make that happen? The theory problem, what factors, in terms of having useful information, what factors really shape my strategy and will have an impact? The measurement problems, how should I measure this? Should I continue to focus on arrivals? Or should I focus on, for example, RevPAR? Will RevPAR tell me more about the health of the industry, of the tourism sector in general? Or should I continue to, as we do business as usual, by focusing only on arrivals and be very pleased when I see numbers going up, 2%, 3% more people coming in? Volume, again, I said, is not necessarily the friend of a small island. So you have to think about that, how to do it. The target problem, should you have these numbers on a daily basis, weekly basis, monthly basis, quarterly basis, yearly basis? You have to think about communication. How can I communicate? What kind of story can I tell the stakeholders for them to believe what I'm saying? The same thing with resources, how can I make this sustainable? How can, for example, the government every year put 5 million, 6 million into the tourism industry? How much should I put there? Because, I've read that more marketing, but remember, marketing has diminishing returns as well. So not necessarily you put more money in marketing, it means that you're more effective. Motivation. How can I motivate people, stakeholders, to implement this? Learning. Do I have a system to learn and how to improve? And finally, the credibility. How can I convince you that we have achieved our goals? So all these 10 issues of management of a destination are crucial. They are all interconnected. So if I miss in one, I'm an unhappy family. And that is how I will be defined as a destination. And that is very important to think about how can I really create a system, and particularly having the necessary human capital in order to make sure that I can take up this major responsibility. And then finally, as small islands, we always have been told that because we are small, we lack scale, and therefore it is almost impossible, an impossible dream to grow, to be successful, to be prosperous. That has been the story since Adam Smith in the 18th century. Okay? But small islands have proven that they can be successful, that they can grow, that they can be prosperous. St. Maarten is an example of that. So you have shown that you can really take up to the challenge and make things happen in a good way, in a good manner, you know, and that you're thinking about the future, which is a very important thing. So, being small, and the other push, which is basically the other side of the paradox, is, well, you're small, you cannot grow, but on the other hand, they're telling you need to diversify. I think strongly, based on the study that I did of 37 islands in the world, that if you specialize, you will be successful. And by creating a strong foundation, based, for example, on tourism, that platform can help you diversify based on tourism. It seems like counterintuitive again, but if you have to spread all your resources, the scarce resources that you have, the limited land, human capital, and so on many things, what will happen at the end is that you will not do anything good. So if you think, and I see you are very strong in tourism, focus on tourism and make sure that what you do, that you do it better every day. That is the secret of success, and that is how small islands can have succeeded and have grown in the future. So small is beautiful, beautiful is rare, rare is special, remaining special requires non-diversification. Specialized in who you are and what you can do. And finally, this is the other part of, I love fiction in a way, books. And I came across this particular book. And what it's telling us that even if we have been successful in the past, the things that we did in the past not necessarily will be the right things to do in the future. The past cannot guarantee the success of the future. So that's why this second principle is so important. If we want things to stay as they are, if we want to remain the same, strong, with passion about what we're doing, we have to change. We have to come up with new processes. We have to come up with new ideas. We have to come up with new measurements. Because measurements shape behavior. So we have to think about these things. And if we think about these things and constantly trying to renew, revisit, and with new processes, I'm sure that there will be a bright future for this country. Thank you very much.
Wow. Well, I spent the last 24 hours with this gentleman, and I must say it was an exciting 24 hours because having discussed all of these topics and ideas, you know, I was jumping in my boots, well, my slippers. Dr. Croes, I would like to now pin you with the Chamber of Commerce pin. So you could wear it proudly in Orlando. Yeah, United. And how about another round of applause for a wonderful presentation by our keynote. Job well done. What we have now, there were a few papers on your tables with some pens. So we would allow for the next 10 minutes to have some questions and answers. I'm sure that many of you might have been triggered or encouraged to write a few things down. And if there are any questions, my assistant Giselle would bring this mic to you. You can stand and read your question to the doctor.
Good evening, Dr. Croes. Good presentation. I'm a medical doctor on this island. I would like to know, what advice do you have for us in terms of medical tourism? What initiatives should Maarten take to make this a success?
You know, quite frankly, I don't know much about St. Maarten because I arrived yesterday and I'm leaving early tomorrow morning. But I'll come back more frequently than before in the next 10 years. What I can tell you though is the following. Orlando just announced that Orlando is going to tap the medical tourism niche. And what we have been doing in Orlando is the following. The first thing that we did is, through the university, we created a medical city. We created a cluster. So I'm not saying that you should do that, but it is the concept of a cluster. And then they specialize in 4 areas, and very clear, which is plastic surgery, oncology, diabetes, and children. And for the past 7 years, we have been testing out this system. In the sense that not only for the medical city, but also in terms of the narrative that is going to be used and the convenience that we have to create for the tourist. Our research has shown that money is not a scarce resource, but time. So translate that in practical terms is you have to create a no-hassle or a convenient type of process for a person, especially in medical tourism. So you have to have all these different components in place before you can launch, because this is a very sensitive issue. You know, health is very sensitive. So the only thing I can say is, based on my experience in Orlando working in this committee, is that you have to create it all, test it several times, and make sure, because if you just go out and start talking about it with a narrative, it might be a false start, and that can create a lot of problems and challenges for you later on. So that is what I can say about it.
Thank you for your question. Were there any more? I see one in the back, Mr. Lee.
Thank you very much. Very interesting presentation. You outlined a number of recommendations, a number of suggestions. I wonder if you could elucidate us in terms of how important public-private partnership is in terms of accomplishing some of the objectives and goals you laid out in your presentation.
It is very crucial. It's not only in the conventional sense of public-private, so meaning government business, it is the whole community. That's why I mentioned the fact that if you have 1 out of 4 households without an income, it is a challenge. So no matter how good you work in terms of the conventional system of private, you're too exclusive of many other stakeholders. So one important thing of smart tourism in the future, or already in the present, is to have an inclusive system, which means the board members, the organizations, they have to really be representative of all the stakeholders, from John Doe all the way to the owners of hotels, restaurants, or what have you. Because if John Doe on the street is not happy with tourism industry, or feels that the benefits are not really accruing to him or her, then you will have a challenge in terms of the hostility that they will reveal towards the guest. So that is very, very important. So it is very crucial to create this inclusive system that goes beyond the conventional way of doing businesses. And in this regard, institutions are very, very crucial in terms of how you do it. In Aruba, just to give an example, the ATA, the Aruba Tourism Authority, has been completely removed from the government. The room tax have been earmarked by law to the ATA, and the board of ATA has expanded from the traditional players within the tourism industry, particularly the hotel managers, to include all other stakeholders, even the small businesses and so on. So that's very important.
Good. Thank you, Mr. Lee, for your question. We have one last question from Mr. Luguis.
Dr. Croes, recently I was in Florida, and there was a conference called International Days in Tallahassee. And the Commissioner for Agriculture made a surprising remark. And what it indicated was that St. Maarten was #1 in importation of agricultural products from Florida. He also indicated the reason that it was through our tourism product why so many companies in St. Maarten is buying from Florida, and why it was #1 when it comes to the Caribbean. My question is, the fact that you are in Orlando, and Miami is more or less one of the ports that we get most of our stuff from. We talk about public-private partnership a while ago, and we talk about joint venture opportunities. When it comes to tourism in itself, because many companies go to Florida, we look at Brazil that's looking to come to St. Maarten through Florida. What is your take on the possibility of that happening?
The joint venture, you mean?
Yeah.
I think one of the ideas that you could think about in terms of implementing, if you really want to boost more demand for stay-over tourism here, is to make use of the network, the traditional network of business people that already have established, for example, in Florida. You're talking about the agricultural sector, for example. It means that you can organize their association meetings here, because you have the contact. Instead of the tourism office, really investing all these efforts to try to know these people, because it's a lot of relationship efforts, and that takes a lot of time. But since you know these people, you can stand up during a meeting like that and say, I offer St. Maarten as the venue for the next meeting or something like that. And if you can do that in a systematic, organized way, it means that in a very effective way, you can bring more people to stay, to come to visit St. Maarten as stay-over tourism. So back channel, use that network that you have created and a trusted relationship with partners in Florida in order to bring more people here and try to increase. I forgot to mention that what I learned is that the length of stay is about 4.5 days. If you try to increase that just by 1 day, it means a lot of additional receipts in the country, and therefore more multiplying for the economy as a whole. Because that is an idea that would be relatively simple, is a low-hanging fruit, that if you organize well, could be very, very effective.
Ladies and gentlemen, how about another round of applause, showing appreciation to Dr. Croes.